Basically, this quarantine isolation law gives I guess the law overseers in the state of New York to kind of apprehend you in your home based on their knowledge of you having some sort of disease or a condition, to where they're able to actually take you from your home and put you in isolation. And it can be for any disease. It doesn't have to be something that was, C19 related. It can be for something as simple as, like, I don't know, toxic shock syndrome that you get from tampons. So,
What?
yeah.
Excuse me?
Are you saying what because you didn't know that, or what?
No, I didn't know that at all. And that description was, I was not ready for that description at all. Jeez. Jeez. Well, I guess. All right. So, as Miracle was so eloquently saying, the quarantine isolation law reinstated after appellate division decision. Now, this is in New York specifically. So,
Of course.
this is in New York specifically. So, a rule that allows state health department to lawfully order someone to involuntarily isolate or quarantine to control a highly contagious disease such as COVID-19 has been reinstated in a unanimous, I clicked on the ad, in a unanimous decision by a mid-level appellate court. The ruling by the 4th Judicial Department, which has jurisdiction in 22 counties in central and western New York, overturns a decision last year by the state court or Supreme Court justice in Cattaraugus County, who found the rule violates the constitutional requirement for a separation of powers between the legislative and executive branches when the promulgating rules as severe as involuntary isolation. So basically, they're saying that, okay, pandemic happened, and we just need to get something out there. Executive order, people can be isolated. They passed this thing through. Then I guess they overturned that.
That's what it looks like.
Or they made a decision about that executive decision saying that, hey, it didn't go through the proper separation of powers where it gets voted on by the legislator after it's, maybe brought up by the governor or the president, if you're thinking of, federal. And it didn't go through that process before it made it to the court, so it should be canceled. And they're saying, we get that, but nah, we're still rocking with it. We think it's a good policy. The Republican petitioners said they plan to appeal the decision to the State Court of Appeals, the state's highest court. The GOP officials in a joint statement expressed concerns that the case could create precedent for overreach into policy making. So, that brings up the question that we have raised. Does this prove government overreach in New York? Like, do you think this is going to bring up something that might lead to overreach in another area? What do y'all guys think?
Yeah, I think so. And I think even before this, we've seen that there's been overreach in different areas, especially once C-19 happened. So having it, I guess, officially written, I think will just make it even worse. So
yeah, and exactly, and that's why it's important to kind of contain these kind of things now while it's still just a state action, because it can be copied over into other areas, into other states who see this as a good idea potentially. Yeah. But it's like these days laws are written the way contracts are. You need special people in order to read and understand them and know what exactly everything means. And it really shouldn't be that way, because there's a lot of loopholes and other things that the average citizen obviously wouldn't catch. And so it's like you can still miss the important aspects of these laws as they're being passed. And it's also important to understand the process in which a law becomes a law too. But
I think that's why they were arguing the separation of powers thing.
yeah, checks and balances.
Yeah. Which, that makes sense. So for me, I kind of looked at it from a little bit of a different perspective, because I don't think there's the law itself is inherently bad. I think there's a place for it to where, like, if somebody's going crazy and wilding out, then yeah, sometimes people need to be, involuntarily isolated. The problem is that we've been conditioned to expect, just not overreach, but corruption from both sides, for policies to be abused in different ways. And you were mentioning loopholes, for people to find loopholes to weaponize different policies. And so it's easy to see how this can easily be weaponized for political gain, rather than saying like, okay, no, this is actually something that can be useful in certain scenarios and has its place in the law, which I think it absolutely does. But I think in the wrong hands, it can be used for bad, to pin one side, like you enforce it against a group of people to I guess discourage them, while you let this other group, kind of get away with it so that they can continue to do whatever and prosper and, go about their business. And so that's the only problem that I have with it. But I don't have a problem with the actual idea. The
Yeah.
problem is the people who are, carrying out these ideas that are, being, brought up within, and the policies that are being brought up. It's not that I dislike a lot of the policies, because a lot of policies have, they sound good, or they may have good intent behind them. But then when power in the wrong hands is, it's not good for anybody. And so that's the problem that we have with, a lot of these, different policies and things. And I think that the GOP and the Republicans, they're like, oh, it's going to lead to overreach. And it's like, yeah, it could. But if this was in favor of you, y'all could easily do the same thing as well. And so instead of people, fighting for political power, they need to be coming together to see how this law can, either affect society in a positive way. Because that's the only reason a law should ever get passed, is like, what is the benefit for society, not what is the benefit for my political group. And I think that's the problem.
I agree with that point. My only concern is like, it makes me think of with mental institutions, where sometimes they'll hold someone involuntarily because they think they need to be held. But there have been instances where someone really didn't need to be held and they weren't able to leave because of some reason they're unable to leave. So that's my only concern, is like holding someone, like who decides who gets to be held there, and how long are they held there? How does their family get to, I guess, intervene in that situation? So I think that'd be my questions.
Yeah.
No, and I definitely agree. And like I said, the overall idea of, involuntary isolation, I think has its place. In what capacity, I'm not sure. And it definitely, in that example that you brought up, it's like, yeah, we need some sort of system to make sure that people who don't need to be isolated, whether it's for, infectious disease that's going around, or whether it's for mental health reasons, they aren't being isolated involuntarily in the wrong circumstances, right? Because as people, we're social beings, and we should be interacting, with society, with our family, with our friends as much as possible, because that's a lot of times where we draw our meaning, we draw our purpose, and we get our joy, and we, just carry out a fulfilling life, is through, our interactions with people. But if you're isolated from that, well, then that can really, send you down a deeper hole that, maybe you've dug a little bit, but maybe you just needed people to help you come out of it. But if you're further isolated, you just keep digging that hole to where it's like a place of no hope, place of no return. And so that's kind of where I was coming from with that. So yeah, let's dive deep, or a little bit deeper into this article here. It says these Republican lawmakers, list some of the guys, There were members of the assembly at the time of fouling argued their legislative powers were usurped from them by the office of government Kathy. Dude, this is going crazy. Let's see. Where is that? Kathy Hochul, I'm not sure how did you say her name, which issued the violation rule last year. So it sounds like she issued it upon somebody. I'm not sure. The court disagreed with the GOP members. The state legislature retained its power to address the regulations. The panel wrote about the body controlled by Democratic supermajority. In July 2022, State Supreme Court Justice Ronald P. Plowitz ruled that the isolation rule violated the constitutional requirement for a separation of powers between the two branches of government. He noted it had not been enacted by the state legislature, but by the administration of the then government Andrew M. Cuomo to respond to the escalating that's supposed to be virus, right? I think that's the typo. Coronavirus, various.
I think it's frozen.
Yeah, I can't see.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But anyway, what do you guys think about that? Do you think this, you kind of answered it, but do you have any closing thoughts before we deuce out this topic?
I guess closing thought is I see that there is a purpose for, certain policies and stuff like that, but I also think there should be a limit to how much the government can intervene in personal things. I think a lot of times people tend to depend on the government to do certain things, like putting someone in isolation or feeding or paying for stuff, when I think a lot of times that's something that we should do as a people, is help other people, not necessarily depend on the government to do that. And I think when we do depend on the government to do that, that is when overreach happens. That's when things kind of get out of control. And I think that's why we are in the predicament that we are in now, where there's just people and there's divisiveness between both political parties, because there's just so much control being in their hands. So
Yeah.
that's my final thought.
Yeah.
Okay, Miracle?
I can agree with that. At some point, we have to understand and define what these statute of limitations are when we create these laws, because it's not as simple as us collectively understanding it anymore. I mean, words have meaning, and in order for us to understand everything we're getting into when it comes to enacting these laws that we're trying to do, it has to come down to us understanding to a T what everything means, as far as, okay, what diseases are we talking about? What are the ramifications for that? What symptoms are we discussing? Does it have to be a known disease? What happens in the case of another C-19 pandemic? It's things like that scare me about it, because laws are necessary and government intervention is necessary, but it's like, to what degree? And then for us to collectively understand what is all entailed in that is really important, because we are the ones that are going to see the end of that.
Oh, that was well said. And I think that we need to, the power in the hands of the wrong people can easily, just continue to corrupt our society. And we need to get back to a place where, our lawmakers and our politicians are, working for the good of the people, and not using that as a masquerade to work for the good of their party to gain political power. Because I think a lot of these policies are being weaponized, saying, oh, we're going to pass this through as a Republican. We're going to be strong. We're going to stay strong to our base. And it's like, I care less about whether you're preaching to your base or this or that. It's like, yeah, I understand that you have to do that. And I understand you got to play politics to win. But at the end of the day, we need to be affecting society in a positive manner in case something like, COVID-19 happens again, so that we have things in place and that we have strong structure that people can rely upon and that can be fine-tuned, right? It's not the time to make them when it happens, because that's the situation that we found ourselves in 2020. It was like, oh snap, what do we do now? And then we have to make up all these things. You don't agree. It's like we're following the science. Oh, yeah, there wasn't really science for it, right? And so we need to elect leaders, or our leaders need to change. So it's kind of an and both, where they're, working towards, hey, what's good for all people, and working together with, their constituents on the other side as well, so that, we can, push society forward in the right direction. But that's just what we think. We want to know what you think. We'll be right back in the live chat. But if you're watching the replay, check this video out next. Right foot